Hey, Michael, great to see you this morning or this afternoon. Just announced the other day that Tennessee will be playing in that environment in Indianapolis coming up and against top-ranked Gonzaga. Talk about taking the team over there and that matchup with the Zags.
Well, it's a great opportunity, Rick. Nice to see you as well. Really good opportunity. We know the kind of reputation Gonzaga has as a program, and even more so this year as the number one ranked team in the country. So it'll be a great test for our guys. We've had some good matchups with them in the past. Coach Barnes and Coach Few have a great relationship, and we remember the game a few years ago in Phoenix, and we played in Nashville, we played out in Seattle. So it's turned into a great series. I think our guys are just excited to be playing. You know what? They're equally as excited about next Wednesday as they are that game and any game on our schedule. But to be able to play in the Jimmy V and make that thing happen with all the adversities that have happened in New York, Orlando, and now ending up in Indianapolis, it's going to be a great event. And I think our guys are really excited and be a great challenge for our team.
Mike, can you kind of walk us through the chaos of, I guess, starting when the season got pushed back a couple weeks, the scheduling chaos in terms of everything that was going to happen in Orlando, and then that got canceled and everything just kind of kept moving around just how crazy have the last few weeks been for you trying to figure out a schedule?
Yeah, I think it's been crazy for anybody, every coach, anybody involved with scheduling, trying to get something nailed down for this kind of season. It's been a challenge. The first challenge was when they moved the date. You obviously had games that were between November 10th to November 25th. And that was the first piece of the challenge is you had games that were scheduled. And so what do you do with those games? Like, for example, Wisconsin still wanted to figure out a way if we could play, but we had to move the date. So there were the challenges of the games that were prior to the new start date that you had to figure out. Then after that, you had to look at what's going to fit. And probably the biggest challenge, as you alluded to, Grant, was the MTEs. When they started moving the MTEs, changing the dates, teams started being able to add teams started dropping out because of all the different medical protocols. That's when it really got complicated, to be honest with you. Our whole approach the whole time was we were going to stick with ESPN, stick with Orlando, regardless of what it was. And we were pretty close to it going out there. And if everything had gone the same way, there would have been one other team in the event with VCU and Charlotte. We would have done it in Orlando. And we were planning on playing Gonzaga in Orlando. But when everything fell apart in Orlando, obviously we had to readjust. So what our approach was, Grant, was just to stay with the teams that we were going to play in Orlando. And that was VCU, Charlotte, and potentially Penn State. Those were the teams. And we decided to create our own event. And we're very thankful and appreciative of the university and the administration and our athletic department to allow us to do that here. And it didn't quite work out for Penn State for other reasons, but to be able to get VCU and Charlotte to be able to come to Thompson Bowling is really exciting, and we're looking forward to the Vol Classic.
Mike Wilson and Ben McKee.
Yeah, kind of that same line of thought. How many points along the way did you feel like you had the schedule settled and figured out, only to then have it thrown back up into the air?
Well, you could go back to prior to everything happening in March. We thought we had this year's schedule finalized, to be honest with you. We were working on 21, 22 in January, February, March. We were completely working on next year's schedule. So that was one. Then the uncertainty of the summer and the early fall, we finally kind of felt like, all right, we have it set again. Then when they moved the date, we got to a point where we thought Orlando was going to happen, and we felt like it was settled one more time. And then finally, when that fell apart, or when that dissipated, I should say, now you had to add games. We wanted to play in an MTE, a multi-team event, because that allows us to get to the maximum amount of games of 27. In a year where they already were limiting the amount of games you could play, our guys want to play. They haven't played since March 10th or 11th last year. There's been a lot of questions on what this season would look like. So games were of the utmost importance. So every time there was any kind of change or any deviation from what it looked like. Our whole thing was we got to get that MTE settled so we can play the maximum amount of games. And that probably was the biggest complication. I think outside of that, adding Appalachian State was a late add to the scenario. But other than that, everything was pretty settled. But probably 3-4 times we thought we had it settled, and finally we're all very excited that it finally is there now.
And how much of a hurdle, if any, have different local or state or city ordinances regarding COVID? Has that been an obstacle at any points in terms of what you guys have scheduled?
Potentially with George Washington, just being transparent. And I think more so for them, if they have to travel, maybe what their area or their county would determine they needed to do on travel back. So that was the only one per discussion that, they actually reached out to us and said, would you guys be willing to play the game right over the border in Virginia? Because that would limit some of their, whether it was quarantine time or whatever they had to go through when they got back to campus. And, and that wasn't something that we were wanted to do. So we'll see how that series, because we had George Washington was on the schedule. That was going to be in Thompson-Boling Arena this year. So, but for the most part, that hasn't come into play, Mike.
Coach, I know Jaden Springer and Keon Johnson arrive as 5 stars, and with that comes lofty expectations. But as a coaching staff, have they in a way exceeded your expectations since they've arrived on campus? And if they have, how so?
Well, you're absolutely right about the expectations, and I think that's just the nature of recruiting. That's the nature of the labels that get put on guys in terms of the stars, as you mentioned, and McDonald's All-American status and things like that. But the best 2 things both of those guys have done since the minute they've stepped on campus is they take defense personally. They play with an aggression and an attack mindset on the defensive side of the ball. And they are both extremely talented on offense. They are going to have great seasons. They're going to help us in a tons of different ways. But what they did from the minute they stepped on campus, which is not always the case, particularly with, as you mentioned, a 5-star player or someone that has great accolades coming in and expectations on them. They came in with a grittiness and a defensive mindset that fits right into our DNA and right into our culture. And I don't want to use the word, surprised by that, but they've stepped right in. And from that standpoint, they are not freshmen.
Gustavo and then Jimmy Himes.
Mike, with less than 1 week away, how ready is the team to start the season?
Yeah, great question, Gustavo. You know what? I think we'll know more Wednesday night when that game ends. And the reason I say that is this. We have not had the opportunity to have 13 guys on one bench yet. We've had an opportunity. We've probably scrimmaged within ourselves 4 different times pretty officially with officials and everything. But bottom line is you have 7 guys on one bench, 6 on the other, or 7 and 7, or whatever the breakdown is. And there's a lot of things you have to maneuver to be able to make that happen and get a real feel. But it's a totally different story when you have all 13 guys, 15 guys on one bench, and rotation comes into play, fatigue comes into play, scouting report comes into play. So those are things we have not had a chance to really feel yet with this ball club. And normally by this time of the year, we've had 1 exhibition game versus a non-Division I, and we have 1 scrimmage versus Division I opponent. And those are 2 big things, 2 big opportunities that nobody in the country is getting them. So I think if you ask that across the country, everyone would say we're waiting until November 25th or whenever the first game is to really get a feel on where we are as a ball club. And we'll know more after Wednesday and Friday next week.
Go ahead, Jimmy.
Mike, in terms of the scheduling, was there an effort to try to stay away from neutral site games just because you weren't sure of the protocols and the safety issues?
Yeah, Jimmy, there was all kinds of questions because what you just said, when this all happened, a lot of neutral site event planners popped up and were saying, we can do this here, come here, we have this set up. But as you said, there's a lot of question marks and trying to figure that out. And that was one of the reasons we decided that one of the best things to do was just to be in Knoxville. And we did set that as a goal, that if we can stay in Knoxville and we can bring teams here to play, that would be ideal, because we obviously know what the SEC protocol is. We know what the University of Tennessee protocol is. We know what the Knox County protocol is, and we can follow that and we can abide by that without any questions or last minute, challenges. From a standpoint of neutral site games like the Memphis game or the Gonzaga game, I think you never want to play too many of those. We want to be able to play in our arena or play true road games to get ready for what the SEC play has. So obviously we're not going to be playing in Nashville this year with the Memphis game, and that made a ton of sense because of just the fan experience. I mean, it's simple as that. I mean, to have a neutral site game and have the fan limited attendance and everything, it makes sense to do for either fan bases. But the Indianapolis game, I think, I'm not even quite sure what the fan attendance guidelines are, but I think it's just more so the unknown of going to a neutral site. This is the year to probably limit it if you could.
Also, with the NBA draft, last night, the number one player picked was from the SEC. That's the fifth time in 10 years an SEC player was the number one overall pick. Previous to that, there was only one, Shaquille O'Neal. And I just wonder if you think that's an indication of how strong this league is to have had that many number one overall picks in the last decade.
I mean, that is a really strong stat. Any conference in the country, it's as talented as any conference in the country. It's not just the number one pick, Jimmy. If you look at it, and it's either 3 or 4. I believe lottery picks came out of the SEC. Aaron Naismith was one of them, and obviously Anthony Edwards was another one. And there was, I think there was 4 or 5 in that range. So it's an extremely strong conference with NBA talent and with teams and with coaches. So, you could look at it that way, and you could look at over the last 10 years, the uptick that the conference is on from a standpoint of talent and teams. So there's no doubt about that, and I think those things just show it. Coro from Auburn, obviously another lottery pick. So, yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. NBA talent.
Rob Lewis and Ryan Shumpert.
Coach, player development has really, kind of been a hallmark of this program ever since Rick got here. If you had to give a most improved player award out this year, who gets it from the guys coming back?
In terms of the offseason, Rob, in terms of what guys have done this offseason?
In terms of the offseason. And I know it was a weird offseason, but still, I mean, who do you think made the biggest strides?
I think it would be unfair, honestly, to categorize one player in that because of what you just said. And these guys did not get a true offseason. Everybody had to do it in their own way, in their locale, wherever they were. Then when we got here, we were limited in a number of ways in terms of time that we could be with them and that we could all be in the gym together. Then we were limited in terms of competition and physicality. So I think it's hard to give it to one guy and say, because I think we'll know more as we get into the season, as we were talking about earlier. But just in general, you think about John Fulkerson, he's added a lot to his game on offense. And as great as he was second half of last conference play at the end of last season, he's added a lot to his game. Josiah James has added a lot to his game. I mean, he is trying to develop a new identity as a player where he uses his size more and his versatility to play multiple positions on both ends of the floor. Drew Pember has worked really hard this offseason. He was hit, it's kind of well known by now and been talked about. He was hit with a lot of contact tracing and he missed a lot of days. But the progress he has made, but as you know, Rob, as well as anyone, the player development piece, whether there's someone that plays 30 or 40 minutes a game or someone that doesn't ever touch the floor, the player development piece is happening every day in a Coach Barnes program. And we're really excited about all the guys, the way they've grown and what they've added to the game. VJ Bailey, who no one really saw last year, he's had a great offseason. So, but the big thing, as Gustavo was talking about earlier, is going to be how we react when we get 13 guys on one bench and how that happened. That's when we're really going to be able to really start to decipher some of these questions.
And Coach, just one quick follow-up on and sticking with player development, being specific about Eve. I know you were instrumental in getting him here. Just how rewarding has it been to see him grow from how raw he was as a freshman to today being named a first team all SEC player by the coaches?
It's awesome for him, and this is what coaching's about. This is what any Coach Barnes program is about. It's always been that way ever since I was fortunate enough to be a player for him and a young assistant for him. That's everything, is these guys having a chance to reach their goals, get where they want to go, have success on the court, have success off the court, and he's a great example of it. And you know what? He deserves all the credit because of his work ethic and his approach every day. He's got an incredible attitude. He's been a team-first player from the minute he stepped on campus. And Rob, you and I have talked about this before. The day he stepped on campus, the first thing he said is, I just want to be the defensive player of the year in this conference. And that's where his goals always have been weighted, was to be a dominant defensive player. And he knows he still needs to be better in that area. But he takes a lot of pride in how he works. He takes a lot of pride in the team. And he trusted the process, and that's probably as rewarding as anything, to see someone who really trusted their own process, was diligent about it, and it's paying off in front of all of our eyes.
Hey, Coach, you talked about Keon and Jaden impressing you with their defensive mindset. I'm just curious, how much of their defensive ability in that mindset were you able to kind of learn about in the recruiting process, and how much of that was more of a surprise when they got to campus?
No, it's a really good question. Absolutely, you saw it, because they play with fierceness and a tenacity on both sides of the ball. They're very strong, athletic wing guards that play the game above what a typical freshman or high school senior would play. But anytime somebody is that highly regarded, and both of them were highly regarded on offense as well, and they come in, but their focus and their mindset, they take it very serious on that side of the ball. Both of them have a long way to go, so I don't want to set any expectations here that are they both have a long way to go learning defense, off-ball defense in particular. Scouting report, which we talked about, is going to be a big thing for both of them that we've tried to introduce to them in the best way possible within our own team. But on ball and a mindset of defense, both guys are ahead of where typical freshmen are. And we did see that in the recruiting process. You could see that because of the tenacity they both played with.
Rick Russo and Grant Ramey.
Hey, Mike, couple questions. The guys have been dealing with the pandemic for some time now, no doubt. How difficult has it been as a staff to kind of navigate them through that, get them ready for what they might, because we're all going through it, get them ready for what they might face with regards to games, attendance, and things are going to look so different. That's one question. The other is several young players on the team, but how neat is it having a couple seniors back like Eves and John Fulkerson to help guide those guys along the way too?
Yeah, so the first part is, I'll be honest with you, we're doing our best as coaches to guide them through that process, but we haven't been through it either. None of us have been in a situation where we walk into an arena and you're just on the court playing. So, we haven't spent a whole lot of time talking about it, other than the fact of in between the lines, whether there's 50,000 people or nobody there, you got to do your job and execute in between the lines. And I think that's our approach. Again, so much will be felt next week when we're in TBA and there's whatever the fan attendance is. And when we get to go to Indianapolis and play in Bankers Life Arena, and if there's no fans in there, we're all going to be going through it for the first time. So we've really kept the focus in between the lines. The other part of that, though, with the pandemic is things normally are very organized. You're talking about month to month, we have calendars. Week to week, you have calendars. Definitely day to day. But things can change at the drop of a minute right now. I mean, that's just what it is. I mean, if something comes up, you may have to suspend something. If something changes, you may have to delay something. And we saw that with scheduling, and it's no different. We've had practices scheduled, and we said, hey, we got to take a break just to be smart. So we got to take today off. We'll be back tomorrow. But you're seeing, and our guys are very cognizant of it. They watch sports. They watch the NBA. They watch the NFL. They see college football. We saw what happened with our own football team last week. So they realize this. We're just trying to do everything we can to be prepared for the unknown. And that's really what sports is this year, is to be prepared for the unknown, to be prepared for surprises as best as possible. So toughness and the ability to adapt, those things are going to be just as important as preparation is when it comes to a successful season for all teams in college basketball. As far as the seniors and having John Fulkerson and Yves Pons, and you could even throw E.J. Anosicki in there because he's been in college 3 years. We were talking about as a staff this morning, Victor Bailey's played 2 years of high-level college basketball. It's really exciting to have that veteran leadership on the team. But here's the one thing this team doesn't have yet. Last year at this time, all these guys, including John Fulkerson and Yves Pons, were both looking to Lamonte Turner and Jordan Bowden. Those guys were the seniors that had been through the start of a training camp, the end of a training camp, the beginning of a season. John Fulkerson and Yves Pons, what they did last year, we all felt they could do it, but they weren't the guys that people were looking to at the beginning of last season. It was all Lamonte, it was all Jordan Bowden because they had been it from the previous years. So John and Yves are still in relatively new position right now. Yes, they did it at the end of last year, and they know what to expect. But they have never been in September, October, November, getting younger guys ready for a season, knowing the difference between what the last 6 or 8 weeks held and what next Wednesday night will hold. They haven't been in that position to have younger guys looking at them to say, hey, what's it going to be like? So we're still going through it. And you think about it, a year ago today, no one really knew who Santiago was. So we look at him as a veteran on this team because he's the starting point guard and has been, but he hasn't been through the beginning of a season yet. This is the first beginning of a season with the University of Tennessee that Santiago Vescovi's been through. So there's still, and this is exciting though, Rick, because there's still a lot of growth for this team to have, and we're going to see that happening.
Speaking of growth, I know you guys wish you had those scrimmages, but from the time preseason practices formally started, what have you guys learned about this team from that point to now, a week out?
A lot of things, but probably the two biggest things, Grant, would be on the defensive side is we have the ability to pressure the ball as much as we want for as long as we want, and we're going to do it. And we're going to be a high-tempo, aggressive, attack-minded defensive team, and we have the depth and the athleticism to do that. And then on the other side of the ball, what we've been able to learn is we really feel like we have probably 4 guys, maybe 5, that can go get their own shot. And coach has made adjustments within our offense to put them in positions to be able to do that in terms of spacing, in terms of tempo, that we have 4 or 5 guys that can really go get their own shot, and we haven't had that in the past. So those would probably be the 2 biggest things.
I know going back to March, you were already excited about this team's defensive potential. Are you more excited about it now after seeing it on the floor the last however many weeks?
Yeah, sure, because we've been able to implement our system. And so it's one thing to know you have the physical tools to do it. It's another thing to know you have the depth to do it, which we've really felt like that, like you said, since March. And we're always excited about our team defensively in terms of what we're going to accomplish. But to be able to see it over the last 8 weeks with our system, with the buy-in, with the defensive IQ, with the guys understanding what we're trying to accomplish, that has definitely got us even more excited.
Thanks, Mike.
Jimmy and Mike Wilson.
Mike, Keon Johnson was asked the other day, who's the toughest guy for you to guard on the team? And he said Santiago Vescovi. Does that surprise you?
No, it doesn't, because Santiago plays with great speed. He's got an incredible feel and IQ, and he's one of the craftiest players with the ball, whether it's off the bounce, whether it's passing the basketball. He's got a great ability, even if he may not be looked at as a dynamic athlete, to get to where he wants to go with the ball. And he uses his own strengths and he uses other people's strengths against them when he's got the ball. So, for example, he knows how to use Keon's aggressiveness and athleticism. he knows how to turn that into a positive for him with the ball, even though he's obviously not as physically strong or fast as Keon. But he knows how to use Keon's strength, because that's a huge strength of his, is his athleticism, his speed. And Santiago, with his ability and with his feel, with his ball skills, he uses that against Keon. And it's been great. It's been great for Keon. And you know what? It's been equally as good for Santiago, to be honest with you, because we know teams are going to try and pressure him. We know teams are going to try and be physical with him. We know teams are going to try and sit on his left hand and make him use his right hand. So when he gets an elite athlete like Keon Johnson or VJ Bailey or the size of Josiah James guarding him and trying to do those things, he just continues to improve his skill level and his craft in terms of being able to be difficult to guard like Keon talked about.
Jeremy Pruitt said the other day that he's already talked to some seniors who said they plan to come back next year. Have you had any of those conversations with your seniors?
They've occurred a little bit, more in passing than they have in any kind of seriousness at this point. I think it's one thing for football to have that conversation, 5-6 games into the season, and we haven't even stepped onto the court yet for our first game. So I think those will happen, but I think the season will tell a lot for anybody that has that opportunity.
Mike, do you think this has a chance to be a good rebounding team? I feel like that was kind of one of those areas last year that you guys weren't up to where you want to be. And how much would the development of Olivier and Urosh impact the rebounding ability of this team?
Yeah, this is a really great point. And yes, we do. We know it needs to be, Mike, because I don't know if we can be the team we want to be if we don't rebound the way we're capable of. Adding EJ was a big piece of that. But as you mentioned, Olivier and Urosh, they've both done a really nice job in the preseason rebounding. We need to carry over. Bottom line is when those guys have their opportunities on the court, it has to carry over. It has to carry over with defensive rebounding, and it has to carry over with an identity that we want to have, which is a great offensive rebounding team. And there's been a lot of emphasis put on that in the preseason, in our film sessions, in practice. Just as important, though, for that is the guys that really need to improve their rebounding is someone like Yves Pons. Yves Pons should be in the class with those guys as a rebounder. And he needs to take a lot of pride in doing that, and he needs to make a concerted effort to go beyond the glass on both sides of the ball. Someone else that's done a really good job of it, and his numbers showed it a little bit last year, but he's been very effective this preseason, particularly offensive rebounding, has been Josiah. Josiah James has done a really nice job offensive rebounding. We had a scrimmage yesterday, and he probably kept 4 or 5 balls alive, crashing the offensive glass. And he's got a knack to rebound the basketball. And on the defensive side, where that can really help us is if he rebounds the ball, he can lead the break, because Santiago or any of our guards can run the wings. And whether he's at the 2, the 3, the 4, or the point guard spot, if he rebounds and he can lead the break, that puts us in a really good position in our transition offense.
Rob Lewis.
Coach, just what does EJ bring to the table? What are you getting with him?
Extreme blue-collar toughness, rebounding, energy, and a guy, Rob, that's playing for what's on the front of his jersey from the minute he stepped in the gym. Because of the unique situation with Nikki, his sister, being a Lady Vol, he stepped right in right away with the mentality that he is playing for Tennessee, and he is all about the team, all about the right things. And a grad transfer is a unique thing. You got someone that's coming for 1 year, may have been somewhere else for 4 years, really developed a lot of pride at whatever other university they were at, and they're coming looking for something specific for 1 year. EJ's different. EJ, deep down inside, EJ's always been a Vol, and we wish we had a chance to have him for 4 years. But the fact is that he's come in with the mentality of this team's DNA and this team's culture from day one. And that's as big as anything. That's really important, Rob. And he plays that way. We love him for it. He's an extremely high energy, high motor player, and he has been very impressive on the glass. He has been very impressive, and that's what this team needs. But he has rebounded the ball very well. But he plays the game within within our culture. And he gets it.
And we'll finish up with Jimmy Himes.
Mike, how many players do you think can play the point?
How many players? Is that what you said, Jimmy?
Yes, sir.
Well, Santiago for sure, Josiah for sure, and Keon Johnson has gotten great reps at it this preseason. Jaden Springer has gotten probably not quite as many as Keon has, but he is working on it, and VJ Bailey as well. So I would say there's 5 guys that have the ability to be a primary ball handler on the floor. The difference is knowing that position, knowing exactly what coach wants, knowing how to run the ball club, and doing that at the level we need our point guards to do it. I wouldn't say we have 5 guys that are ready to do that right now. I think we probably have 2 to 3 that could probably get that accomplished, but I really believe we have 4 or 5 that are capable of playing that spot from a ball handling perspective and able to run that position if need be. And in a year like this, when we all know foul trouble and you all know normal situations that can happen game to game, but in a year like this where there's so much unknown, it's nice to have, 3-4 guys that we're comfortable handling the basketball.
You had that
learn the system.
I'm sorry. When you have that many that are comfortable, does that make you harder to guard?
Hopefully. I think when we play other teams and they have multiple point guards on the floor, it is a challenge, and it's kind of what we alluded to earlier, an ability of a rebound and go, what we call it. If a guard rebounds the ball and he's not at the point guard spot and he pushes the ball and gets us in our offense, that's lethal in transition. So if you play 2 point guards or maybe 3, if there's a lineup that has Santiago, Josiah, and Keon on the floor at the same time, which that will happen absolutely, and you saw that lineup out there, any 3 of them could rebound the ball and lead the break. And that is going to make you that much more explosive in transition. So, yeah, you want to believe that, Jimmy, that it does make you more difficult to guard if you can play multiple point guards at the same time. Or as we say it, someone that just has point guard skills. You don't have to be a point guard, but if you have point guard skills, and that's probably a better way to say it, we think we potentially have 4 or 5 guys with point guard skills.
All right, everybody. Appreciate everyone jumping on. Mike, appreciate your time. Really good stuff.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Mike.
Tom.